Just like all of you, I'm here to learn from our panel of industry experts in the effort to bridge the gap between design and construction. And therefore, it is with greatest pleasure that I would like to introduce to you today's panel. Let us start with Jennifer from JRM Construction.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Elvira, and everyone here today. I'm, as I mentioned, Jennifer Urrutia. I'm JRM Sustainability Project Manager. I oversee sustainability efforts on various projects, as well as work on in-house efforts to really help carry out sustainability through and within JRM. I'm a dedicated resource for the company, so we try to help sustainability integrate with the status quo.
Thank you, Jen. Carpet Cycle.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sean Regal. I'm the founder and president of Carpet Cycle since 1999. Prior to starting Carpet Cycle, I worked for waste management in the Brooklyn area of Varick Street in the mixed waste MRF. I saw the need that no one was really collecting and recycling carpet. So it's been a long 22 years. We're the leader in carpet tile and ceiling tile collection and recycling in New York City and the Northeast. Pleasure to be on board today, Elvira. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Cooper Recycling.
Hi, I'm actually sitting maybe in Sean's old office on Varick Avenue at the old waste management MRF. It's now Cooper Recycling's construction and demolition recycling facility. Cooper Recycling, we are a family owned and operated business owned by Adrian Cooper and run by Naomi Cooper. We are an MWBE. We work with everybody in the construction industry on demolition, alteration, renovation, and new construction. Commonly all generate waste as a byproduct. And so we are where that debris goes. There are no active landfills in New York City. So we actually take in debris, we process it, sort it by commodity, and we transfer it to end users. And what we can't recover, we send to landfill. Thank you, Elvira, and to all of you for being here and for inviting us. Very excited to be here.
Amazing to have you here. Brian.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian McMenemy, and I am a superintendent with Jacobson & Company, which specializes in drywall, acoustical ceilings, specialty ceilings, rough carpentry, and OSHA protection. Jacobson is a family-owned company that has been an integral part of the New York and New Jersey construction scene for over 130 years. Since 1889, our major projects span a broad array of areas, specifically office interiors, cultural and entertainment, retail and restaurants, sports, healthcare, education, residential, and hotel. Examples of notable projects and clients include Google, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Apple flagship store in New York City, and Yankee Stadium. I personally have over 30 years experience as a carpenter, and I've spent the last 10 years of my career as a superintendent with Jacobson. In my current role, I have overseen hundreds of projects with an emphasis on craftsmanship, safety, quality, and operational excellence. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Brian. Michael?
Good afternoon, IFMA, and excited to join this panel. My name is Michael Ostroff. I actually have a degree in construction management, and for the last 33 years, plus or minus, I've owned and operated one of North America's largest monumental grade woodworking companies, that's Patella Woodworking. I also own RPG Acoustical, and that's a company that specializes in products that absorb and diffuse sound. My experience with the A&D community, it always starts with project base, understanding the vision, reviewing the design development drawings, and most certainly the construction documents. So we interpret it, we come up with an estimate, we get hired, then we draw shop drawings, we field measure it, and then we fabricate it off of those measurements. We're always searching for the best materials, you know, to achieve the design intent. And the specifications don't always state that subjective outcome. So it's been my pleasure over the years to work with the A&D community to try to find those materials that make that outcome happen. So that's my deal.
Thank you, Michael. And Brita.
Hi, everybody. It's great to join you all today. My name is Brita Everett. I'm a senior associate and lead accredited professional with Huntsman Architectural Group. I've been in the industry for about 15 years now, working as a licensed architect, designer, and project manager. I'm also a professor at the Pratt Institute in the Interior Design School. At Huntsman, we focus on workplace interiors and also building repositioning. From our offices here in New York, San Francisco, and Chicago, we service clients both locally and nationally in sectors such as tech, finance, media, legal services. You know, we really believe that the core of design is about the human experience. So we embed principles of sustainability and wellness into our projects. We recently completed a net zero new building in Boulder, Colorado last year. We've also recently completed a 600,000 square foot tech headquarters that's LEED Gold on the West Coast. And, you know, we are also involved in a lot of smaller scale tenant improvements, you know, with a focus on design vision and quality. So, you know, the health of the environment, the spaces, the occupants of the spaces, you know, that's really at the core of what we do. Great to be here, you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. So let's just jump in. Let us start by establishing the types of demo and construction waste produced and handled during the project. Let us start with Sean. What types of waste do you handle and in what quantities?
Thanks, Elvira. Our specialty is handling the post-consumer carpets from commercial office spaces and acoustic ceiling tiles. We typically remove them pre-demolition, or we call it deconstruction, and we could do that pre-permit before any of the walls or electric is touched on these projects, therefore advancing the schedule. We need to get the carpet and ceiling tile out intact. It's very challenging to recycle those materials after they've been through a mixed waste process due to the contamination. Fundamentally, carpet recycling is so challenging because there are just hundreds and hundreds of products. Every year, the 7 or 8 major carpet mills introduce several dozen innovative products, which I think they're doing a very good job from a sustainability standpoint with the products to lower the carbon and lower the embodied energy, but not all of them are designed to be recycled. So thankfully, most carpet tiles do have a circular economy recycling market or potential for reuse. On the ceiling tile side, we partner with Armstrong Industries, and 95% of the ceiling tile we collect is shipped to Marietta, Pennsylvania plant, just a few hours near Lancaster, where it's, again, circular economy recycled back in the new mineral fiber ceiling tile. Our quantities range from 200 to 300 tons per month of each of those materials, or 8 to 10 tractor trailers each. Our mode of collection is with our smaller box trucks, because obviously New York is so dense and squeezing into the small loading docks or loading the sidewalk side. But that's what we've been growing for the past 20 plus years. Thank you. Thank you.
Will, what about Cooper Recycling?
So following that kind of deconstruction that Sean was just describing, in the deconstruction process, a good contractor is gonna sell the metal, the scrap metal, probably call Sean to have the carpet and ceiling tiles removed beforehand. What we primarily handle is all of the mixed debris that's remaining. And again, this is debris that's coming from any sort of construction site at all. So demolition, new construction, renovation, alteration, you name it. Mm-hmm. So we kind of see a whole gamut of what I would call mixed debris. We process typically about 1,500 tons per day. For reference, New York City produces roughly 8,000 tons of construction and demolition debris per day, at least when things are normal. And so we handle around 1,500 or so. Of that 1,500 tons, on average, I would say it's approximately 15% of that is wood. 20 some odd percent of that is going to be brick, concrete, and masonry. You're going to get small amounts of plastic and paper and cardboard, and around 10% metal. Again, and those numbers, by just for reference, are all by weight, not by volume, which is visual. These are literally scaled out. on top of that, I mean, I would say right now our recycling rate is approximately between 60 and 80%, depending on how you define recycling, which is something we'll discuss also. And then there's what we call ADC, which is almost like a dirt-like substance, so that when we actually process all of the mixed debris through our system, everything is being bounced up and around and shaken around and moved around so forcefully that things actually crumble into small bits, which we screen. And so we call that ADC, or screenings. ADC stands for alternate daily cover. And that comprises about a third of what we ultimately end up processing. So mostly are things that you would kind of expect: wood, metal, concrete, and masonry. And then in New York, because there are so many plastic bottles going in because people are eating lunch on job sites and throwing their lunch in the containers, we do see a decent amount of what you would typically consider household waste. But that's what we handle. And again, that's also fairly unique to New York City. Regionally, you're going to get differences in construction and demolition recyclers, what they receive, depending on the kind of neighborhood you're in. If you're in an urban environment versus a suburban environment, you're going to have slightly different waste stream. But that's just about for us.
Thank you, Will. Brian, a question to you. As a carpenter, what type of waste do you produce during construction? Brian?
You're on mute.
That's the top phrase in 2020. You're on mute.
Sorry, guys, I'm back on.
Brian, did you hear my question?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay, there are 5 primary areas of waste that we develop. So we install drywall, metal framing, ceiling tile, insulation, joint compound buckets. So I'm just going to give you an example of how much drywall in a year that we install. Approximately 8 million square feet of drywall. So that's roughly 200,000 pieces of 4x10 sheets of drywall. 200,000 pieces. 10% of that is waste, which is 20,000 pieces. If you took those 20,000 pieces of drywall and you stood them up on end, it would be 151 miles from here to Albany of drywall waste per year. That's an incredible amount of material that gets wasted every year.
It is indeed. Thank you, Brian. Michael, similar question to you. Could you paint us a picture of how much waste does Patella produce on any given project? What does it look like?
So Brian gave you a distance comparison. So everyone knows what the Statue of Liberty looks like. It's about 305 feet tall. So if you were to stack up and convert my waste, which is about 620,000 pounds a year of waste, wood waste, and convert that into a 4x8 sheet of 3/4 inch material, that would be almost as high as the Statue of Liberty. So the opportunity here on this call and is massive. It's massive. So think of that. That pile of MDF 4x8 sheets as high as the Statue of Liberty every year. That doesn't even include the liquid waste that we get rid of, which is might not seem like a lot, but it's well over 200 gallons of caustic material that is not recyclable. So that's hazardous waste. So the issue that we're all talking about has tremendous opportunity for all of us to be very impactful to each other, our children, our clients, the planet. It's very exciting to be part of this.
Yeah, pretty staggering statistics.
Yeah.
In thinking about construction waste, it is important to understand that the first step of waste management does not actually involve waste at all. The first step is about reuse. The question goes to the group. How do we move the needle here? Give us some examples of how to reuse the existing how the reuse of existing can affect the outcome. Brita, why don't you start first and let us know and tell us, how do we as designers, architects set the stage for reuse?
So I think if we want to introduce circularity into our design process, this idea that we're reusing as much as possible or recycling as much as possible to divert it from the landfill, we have to start thinking outside the box. We have to change our approach to design. And I think our core values as an industry, I've been reflecting a lot lately about the fact that as architects and designers in school, we're trained to be able to work within this sort of blank canvas. We're taught to sort of crave that. We want to start from scratch. We want, that sort of gratification. And I think our industry, we reinforce that. We revere the projects that are sort of the bright, the shiny, the new, it's exciting. They're publicized. They become the benchmarks that we all aspire to. I think it's rare that somebody looks at a space where, all the partitions remain, part of the furniture is reused, maybe the millwork's refinished. No one looks at that and think, wow, that's the most innovative thing I've ever seen. So I think, culturally, we have some work to do together to sort of reframe how we think about design and what we consider as sort of beautiful or innovative. I think from a more practical standpoint, we have to think about reuse as early as possible in the design process. I think even during leasing or site search, the design team will go out to the site and we'll think about, the column spacing of a potential space for a tenant. We'll think about the size of the windows, the depth of the space, the mechanical systems. What about a more serious conversation about what can be reused, right? And then when we're looking at space planning, there's this sort of opportunity, I think, to be more cognizant of what can be reused. So, in thinking about mechanical systems, for example, I think a lot of times we assume that the mechanical will be overhauled, it's a new tenant, let's start from scratch. But in reality, if there's systems that, haven't outlived their warranty and there's a part of the space where it's been fit out for high density occupancy, why tear that all out? Let's look at the program, and if there's that need, let's put that in the same spot potentially. These are some of the opportunities, I think, to collaborate more and sort of plan a little bit better up front. And I think, the reason that we're all here today is to leverage different types of expertise. So I think having some of that at the beginning of the project, right? Whether it's the architect and the engineer or the contractors, the mill workers, folks involved in recycling that are on this call, they can help us determine what's actually reusable and salvageable and the costs that may be associated. So I think at the end of the day, it's really about smart planning. And I think, your initial reaction may be, wow, that's a lot of people to get involved in the beginning, but I think it only feels like a lot because it's not what we do now. And if we can plan better and smarter up front, we could actually save costs, time, headaches down the road. So I see this as a major opportunity for change in how we work.
Absolutely. I'm glad we're actually recording this session because a lot of great stuff is being thrown around. Jen, as a contractor, how do you assist your client in evaluating opportunities for reuse?
I think Brita hit it right on with collaboration being one of the more key factors.
Right.
Bridging the gap between design and construction. I think getting us early on board, we're able to involve and help identify opportunities of what can be salvaged and what can be reused. On a previous project, the water tower on top of the building was reused, and the wood was then, with patella over here, refurbished and then used as doors for the interior. So a way of where a little creativity for the design was taking elements of the old building and bringing it inside. That's one opportunity. A lot of the MEPs, the ductwork, sprinkler mains, alarm devices, this could all potentially be reused as well. A lot of the times it's good enough condition. Obviously, depending on the layout, will determine how effectively that can be reused in the existing place. but ductwork is another opportunity we see. Raised flooring as well. Office fronts, those tend to also have a lot of value. Us coming on board early on and identifying what is salvageable and reusable just allows for opportunity that, during the value engineering phase, we could also evaluate what's currently on site, some of the door hardware, for instance, some of the door frames. We could use this for also cost savings for the client during the VE stage. So if it's not captured early on in design, we could perhaps start considering what's existing and using that for the VE phase. One of our superintendents on the call right now also suggested saving some of the drywall partitions for our field office. So when we are on site, not necessarily building new walls, but really using the existing partitions and whatnot that exist to help in that case as well. So
that's great. So Brian, kind of to piggyback on what Jen was saying, in previous conversations, you mentioned saving black iron during demo. How do you go about salvaging it, and what are some of the other opportunities for use on the existing site?
Yes, so saving the cold roll channel and black iron on a job is a great idea. They're universal components of every ceiling system. They can be easily removed with no damage and reused from job to job. Metal doors, door frames, associated.
Uh-oh.
And I think we just lost Brian. All right, let's move on to Sean. Sean, part of you. Oh, Brian, are you back?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Keep going.
Closures, all the associated hardware could all be reused and recycled on jobs. Oftentimes, existing spaces have metal tabs precast into the deck, and during the demolition phase, those tabs get burned off. Those, we like to see them saved and reused. What that does is it minimizes the shots and pins that our lathers have to shoot into the deck, so we could reuse all those tabs for new ceiling installations.
That's great. Sean, back to you. Part of your mission statement states, our mission as Carpet Cycle is a simple one, to find use for post-consumer carpet. What are those uses and what is the process? I'm assuming this is referencing the reuse aspect of this question.
Right. Well, what we've learned in our 20+ year history is carpet tiles are more often they style out rather than wear out. Typical lease in New York City, I believe, is 10 years, maybe sometimes 5. The life of the carpet tile, the way it's designed, is most definitely 8 to 10 years, if not longer, if it's maintained properly. So often when we come in after the furniture is removed and take out the modular carpet tiles, by their very design, the modularity allows them to be reinstalled. So there might be traffic patterns or occasionally a sun fading issue, but the sun doesn't really affect the carpet so much anymore, but occasionally traffic patterns. What we'll do at our shop in Roselle when we bring the carpet tile back is sort out stains and cut pieces and keep whole ones, and we grade them in an ABC system. We've donated carpet tiles to Habitat for Humanity, and of course our friend Justin Green that runs Big NYC in Brooklyn, the Building Materials Reuse Center, has taken carpet from us in the past too. It's just a challenge, I think, for myself and others to do carpet tile reuse, is that the density of New York City, New Jersey is wonderful to get more material, but then the storage is more expensive as well. Storage space, warehousing has gone through the roof in New Jersey the past couple of years, and even more with the pandemic. It's just very, very expensive. So there's a balance beam there you have to follow to how long you can hold that material before you're able to find a home. And then matching up quantity and potential for color and style is challenging too. So it's typically going to more of a B commercial space where we're looking to save significant money, and that's what we've provided to reuse for the carpet tile. Broad loom, of course, part of its drawback is it really gets destroyed upon removal, especially if it's glued down. So that glue can act as a contaminant in any recycling process for the broad loom. And Brawlham, of course, has the calcium carbonated sand in the backing that makes it very challenging to recycle. So we like carpet tiles.
Thank you, Sean. And Michael, what architectural woodworking that exists can be taken down and reused?
So a lot of great ideas. Jennifer was talking about some recycled wood tanks. On another project in Hudson Yards, we took recycled the water tanks that are on the roof, those gigantic water tanks. Now, many of them are 100 years old. The lumber in that tank is redwood, mostly, some cedar, and that material is 200 years old. And so we've taken that material and resawn it and made wall paneling out of it. Who would have thought of that? Brita, maybe. But so it's the reuse of materials that is exciting. But what I want to talk about is we all have been in spaces, the typical, Fortune 500 space that has walnut paneling on the wall or oak paneling. I want to use Trinity Church as an example. Trinity Church built a building down at 74 Trinity, 30-story building, and the first 10 floors is now for Trinity. Interestingly enough, that's not the typical user. I asked them, how do they look at their ROI on their investments? And they told me 75 years. We're talking about leases that are 5 to 10 years. But there's very few, if a handful of users that have an ROI of 75 years. Now on that project, it was massive. It was an 8-figure woodworking job, not $1 million job, but a multi-million-dollar job. We on that job purchased about 150,000 square feet of oak veneer, North American oak veneer. So how many trees is that? That's probably around, I would say 10 trees, 11 trees that were sliced up into veneer, and then we made paneling out of it. Well, the paneling on the job was only about 46,000 square feet total. So what does that mean? That means we had to buy 3 times the amount of veneer that we actually used on the wall. The waste factor is huge. And that has to do with our preconceived sort of ideals on what is good design as it relates to using veneer. So we all know that there's, balancing and matching and things of that sort. So just everyone on the phone, there are a lot of folks on this call that know a lot about woodworking and some know a little bit. But if I take a 10-foot wall, architects say they want to balance and match the whole wall. What does that mean? That means if I buy a flitch, a log of veneer, and a tree that's round is cut up, the veneer leaves go from 5 or 6 inches wide to 20 inches. As you go through the tree, it gets wider and wider. Well, if I do a balanced elevation, I'm cutting all the veneer to the same width, which may be 8 inches. So what do you think happens to all that other material? It gets clipped off and thrown out. The length. Let's say that the ceiling height is 8'6" or 9 foot. There's a baseboard that's 6 inches. There might be a light valance on it. But let's say I'm left with 7 foot or 7'2" of a panel. Well, material is not made 7'2". The core that the veneer is pressed on is 8 foot high by 4 foot wide, or 5 foot wide by 10 foot high, or 5 foot wide by 12 foot high. So that core material that's 4 foot wide by 8 foot high, and now I have to balance the whole across the wall. So now I have to cut the 4 foot down to 3'4" or something, I'm guessing. And then the height I have to cut down to 7'6". So that goes to my pile that adds up to the Statue of Liberty, right? That goes in that pile. And then the veneer, I typically buy 3 to 1. So what am I doing with the other 2/3? It goes into that pile. So if you can think about it, it's because it's driven by the design, which is driven by how we see this for the last, 50 years in this industry. So who's to say that it can't be as pleasing to the eye by utilizing the maximum amount of that material? And buying a flitch that fits the size of the use of the material. So if it's 7'6" high, we could probably find a veneer that's 8 foot high. And maybe normally we clip out the top and we clip out the bottom because we don't like the little spot at the bottom or the little spot at the top. And we don't like the width. So there's all this waste. And it goes back to what Brita said, is challenging what actually is good design. I think we need to redefine what's good design with a higher calling, which is the impact of our decisions.
On the environment.
Hopefully on the environment, I think that, I could go on and on, but I think that's a good enough example to
It is.
leverage.
Thank you, Michael.
For asking.
And it goes back again to the shift in our design thinking, right? Because it starts with us. So thanks everybody for contributing to this conversation so far. We're going to take a little pause and take a poll. Chris, if you could post it. All right, so take about 10 seconds to answer the following question. What waste management hurdles do you currently experience? It's a multiple choice. No innovative ideas, lack of specialized knowledge, cost concerns, no interest from those involved. I do not experience any hurdles. Chris, do I close the poll? Do I end it?
Yep, I can see a couple more people entering there. We'll end it soon. You've got about another 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Lovely. Okay, let's end this poll.
So the winner is cost concerns. Great, because we will talk about costs later on in the conversation. The closed runner-up is no interest from those involved. Good point. And the third one is lack of specialized knowledge, and that is why we're here. So let's remove this from our screen.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And move to the next part of our conversation. So when reuse is ruled out as an option, we must look toward recycling as the next best path forward. So the next question is really for Sean and Will. Sean, what does it take to divert waste from the landfill? What challenges do you face?
Well, again, with carpet specifically, there's so many different products that causes increased cost and challenge. I know a handful of folks on the call have been to our previous Newark facility that was 50,000 feet and had about $2 million in equipment. And we sorted residential broadloom for many years, from 1999 really through 2017. And those materials, commercial broadloom carpet would fall in the same category. You needed to sort by nylon 6, 66, polypropylene, polyester, and wool or other. So for every 1,000 pounds of carpet, you had 5 200-pound piles ostensibly, and they'd be going in a different direction and need to be processed separately. So that really added extensive cost. As the markets changed, macroeconomic factors such as low oil price make virgin plastics go down. Therefore, the recycled costs may remain constant and not be able to go down as much. So if virgin is cheaper than the recycled, the manufacturer is likely going to choose virgin for cost savings. So that's really the poorer side of things with that broadloom that we wrestled with for many, many years. We've really refocused on the commercial sector. And as I mentioned, I think New York City now is 75 to 80% carpet tiles, and also, heavily laden with the acoustic ceiling tiles that we recycle in partnership with Armstrong. So the ceiling tile bit is a little bit easier since there's fewer products. There's still a good 10 or 12 ceiling tile types, but not hundreds. So our first step in the process is to come in and audit what the materials are there. And therefore, someone asked about the delta for potential delta for reuse of materials. And there could be a delta, but again, to Britta's point, let's get in early and see what materials we have, see what the doors are like. And when we've worked with Doorstop in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, great guy doing, he's an architect doing good things, but to ship doors even from New York to Pennsylvania, to get them on the truck without scratching them. And are they 8-foot doors, are they 9-foot doors, thickness, you know, the hinge type, all these things, all these details matter. So there's where the time comes into it. And of course, time is money. So, thank you.
Interesting. So the problem is a variety and not enough time. Well, how does the diverted waste get to your facility, and who is involved? And
can you repeat that one more time?
What is the diverted? How does the diverted waste get to your facility, and who's involved? And what is the recycling process once it reaches your facility? If you can describe it briefly. I know it's a loaded question, it's a lot, but.
Yeah, so it's a good question, though. But so as I said in the beginning, we don't have any trucks on the road. We're just the recycling facility. So oftentimes, or what will always happen is on a construction site, you'll hire a hauling company, or the GC or the demo contractor will hire a hauling company to take the materials away. Where the materials go is often not a concern. As long as the materials leave, then the job is typically complete. So what happens is we actually accept the material from the haulers. So the haulers come here and they dump it. So that's how the debris arrives at the facility. Once it's arrived at the facility, we take everything as mixed and we load it through a series of conveyors that's stretched to about a little over a mile in length. They go through a whole series of massive pieces of equipment, density separators, optical sorters, magnets, eddy currents. It's a lot. There's about 130 motors in our system at the moment. And so through that process, once everything has been automatically and mechanically separated, we then can sort it by hand. And that's exactly what we do. We sort them into commodity types. Again, you know, because we're in New York City, we are fairly limited on space. We're entirely space constrained. And so we, and because of that, we're limited in what we can actually stockpile. So whereas if you were in Austin, Texas at a MRF of a similar size to us, you might be on a 100-acre piece of land. We're here on 5 acres. We can only do so much separation. So we separate literally as much as we possibly can. But just as an example, you know, just speaking about metals that maybe everybody can relate to, we have ferrous and non-ferrous metals. Most recycling facilities, if they have ferrous metals, they're going to split them up. If they have non-ferrous metals, they're going to split them up, you know, copper, brass, aluminum. We're primarily just moving non-ferrous, ferrous. We have wood markets that we can move wood to. But we're not splitting up into different colors of mulch, if you will, which you might find in other places. So that's a very, very high-end overview of how the process works in terms of separating out what's recyclable. What's non-recyclable is consolidated and sent via trucks to landfill that are several hundred miles away. I'm proud to let everybody know that we're hopefully in the next, waiting on some permitting, but we're hopefully going to start moving a good amount of our material that goes to landfill. About half of it will start leaving our facility via rail, which we think is a much more sustainable mode of transport for this type of material that truly has no other higher, better use. We are limited in what we can do with it. And that, I mean, it wasn't exactly your question about some of the challenges that we face, but one of the challenges we face is in the public perception, helping to explain to people that not everything can be recycled. We can raise the bar from where we're at. New York City currently recycles about 34% of their construction debris. Like I said earlier, we're between 60 and 80, depending on your definition. So we've shown that you can raise the bar. We're still working on getting to a higher level, but there are still challenges that we face every day.
Thank you, Will.
For drywall, do you want
Sorry?
do you want to touch upon drywall real quick? drywall is tough to recycle. So I don't know if perhaps briefly.
Yeah, I
Thanks, Jen.
have a feeling we have a number of people here who are happy to chime in as well. And yes, so gypsum board and drywall, when it comes to us, as I was describing before in our process, we take everything mixed. That's how our facility is designed to process everything. We want it to come in mixed. What happens when you bounce everything up and shake it around is, like I was saying before, things crumble. And the number one crumbler is gypsum wallboard. Gypsum wallboard crumbles into very small pieces, which then contaminates everything. It contaminates our wood pile because it has a very similar density to wood. It contaminates our fines pile that I described as ADC before, because gypsum is a high sulfur content, and typically landfills don't want to put that stuff in their landfills. It screws up the actual infrastructure of the landfill. So gypsum is something that we find is incredibly challenging to deal with when it comes in mixed. If we have, I'm sure more people can elaborate on the pre-sorting process for gypsum and for carpet and ceiling tile, like Sean does. That is absolutely critical, especially for us, because that stuff really can, the mixed gypsum, it gets attached to other materials that could otherwise be recycled and contaminates it.
Thank you, Will. Now, moving on to the next topic of our conversation, which is about evolution of design standards and processes. We often rely on certifications such as LEED to guide us through waste management best practices, but we all know that not every client goes for a certification. This question is for Brita. What recommendation does Huntsman put forth for projects not pursuing a certification?
So I think it was mentioned earlier, but commercial leases are anywhere from 5 to 10 years, sometimes even 3 years. So we're turning over spaces rapidly, right? So we're generating a lot of waste in this particular industry. And so LEED is great because it provides us a sort of metric and benchmark, right? You can establish at the beginning of your project, like, look, I want to divert 20% of the waste per square foot or something like this. But the thing about it is that it's very outcome driven. It's not process driven. So we need to sort of figure out together as an industry what that process looks like, how to get there, and who's involved. And that's sort of, I think, the reason that we're all here today is to better understand our contributions, as a community to the process. And so, at Huntsman, we're dedicating a lot of resources to this type of R&D. In addition to the folks on this panel, we're also actively working with office front vendors to talk about their system, the components of the systems, how they can be reused or recycled. We've been working with furniture dealers to understand what they do with the furniture. Can we specify certain products that can be disassembled? Because again, disassembly is part of the circular economy, right? This notion that after one life, you can, repair and reuse those components in another way. So we're really building upon that and using that to inform our design decisions on projects. So there's sort of 3 big changes that have come from that research. One, bringing folks on early in the process, like I'd mentioned. William more recently has assisted us on a project. We brought him in at the beginning to the job site. We started to strategize about reuse, recycling, how waste could be separated and hauled off the job site, which I think is a conversation that most architects and designers wouldn't necessarily get involved in, and certainly not early on in a project. So it sort of shifted our approach a little bit. I think also evolving our design details and specifications. Brian has showed us a lot about, like the cutoffs at the end of a wall of sheetrock, use that to build a header, consolidate the different types of studs that you're using on the job site, specify fewer sizes so that the scrap can be reused. Or the likelihood of reuse increases. What Michael said about the veneer, why do we book match everything? Why not think about slip matching things or treating veneer differently? So all of that is being sort of integrated into our specs. And then the last piece is that, you know, we're starting to look at the LEED scorecard, and we've taken some inspiration from that. You know, what do we do on the project that isn't going to be LEED or WELL certified? Going back to your question. So we've created our own sort of internal scorecard to track sustainability efforts from the beginning of the project through construction, so that we can ensure that we're doing the things that we need to do. So beginning with visioning, what types of conversations do we need to have with the client? How can we talk to them about waste management and establish certain goals around that, and have the right conversations with the right folks within the client's organization. You know, okay, now we're at a point where we need to be talking about costs, you know, have the project manager at the table, the client, the GC, and figure out the costs associated. You know, the materials research that I mentioned. So this sort of scorecard is really meant to get us through the design process in a way that feels a little bit more tangible, and helps us sort of track the effort that we're making. It helps us be accountable, really. So I think the net out about all of this is that, you know, thinking about recycling and reuse really takes a sort of hands-on approach. You know, you can't expect the contractor on the site to deal with the waste and figure it out. I think there's an opportunity for us to do more on the design side. Going back to what Jen said, this notion of like bridging the gap between design and construction. And I think being open to evolving our process. We can't continue to work the same way that we are working if we really want to achieve these goals.
Absolutely. Jan, you know, on the topic of accountability, what if you do not have Huntsman or client providing the guidelines for waste management on the project? What steps do you go through in order to get there?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking as Brita's speaking, yeah, you know, we work with you on most jobs, and it might be easier handling the waste. So if we don't have a project pursuing LEED or the client dictating any sustainability directives, one benefit from LEED, even if it's not being certified, LEED projects have allowed us to be a bit more creative with how we divert waste. And so it's really allowed more innovation to come just based on these standards we have to meet. We have to, you know, meet certain diversion. And now LEED is also gearing more towards just the generation, like reducing the generation of waste. So trying to prevent waste as a whole. So that will be very design driven. So if the design is not driving less waste, what can we do on site to really help, you know, subcontractors liable for waste they're producing? So one aspect I'm really trying to encourage more that has been quite successful in our projects is integrating carpet cycle. We have been doing this on more projects, even if there's no sustainability directive. And our field team have actually seen a lot more improvements based on the demo phase, taking that carpet and ceiling tile, assuming it's not a white box. Every project basically has a ceiling tile and carpet tile ready for demo. It helps for a few benefits. The project is a part of it's being reused, so you kind of help keep the structure intact of the ceiling framing, as well as the ability to work during the day. And so a lot of demo restrictions won't allow us to work during the day because of the quiet hours. Carpet Cycle and their work help us start demo during the day because of the quiet work that they're doing. So that's just another added benefit of, you know, getting this project going during hours we may be restricted. And so in addition, helping recycle these materials that would not be recyclable if it wasn't processed, as Sean explained. So we're taking materials that are not typically recycled when they're commingled and helping divert them that way. And a little bit of what Brita mentioned as well, how Huntsman does a scorecard. We're working in-house to have this for our estimating team, a standardized type of practices that subcontractors have to follow for the project, even, you know, if it is a project not for LEED, but just helping reinforce these waste mitigation measures, helping preventing packaging, finding other uses for all the protection on site. A lot of the waste is protection at the end of a job. So really working with our field team in these ways as well. Sheetrock separation is one that I'm, you know, really trying to figure out and push a lot more. Space constraints in New York City make this challenging. We did a project and dropped it off at Cooper Recycling this past Friday, and I know it was a little laborious for our field team because of double handling, but sheetrock separation on site, is really important as well. Really tackling materials that are not recyclable if they're commingled. That's really what we're focused on.
Right.
So, helping, achieve greater recycling rates.
Thank you, Jen. Brian, can you give us a brief overview of what practices you have in place to reduce waste on job sites? And alternatively, what suggestions do you have to improve our details and specifications to help reduce waste?
Okay, so typically on most jobs that we're on, you have a typical soffit and fascia detail that has hard framing to the deck. What we like to do is utilize black iron to effectively lower the deck height down so we can use less framing materials. For example, if we have a 10-foot fascia off the finished floor and a finished ceiling height of 12 foot and a deck height of 15 foot, we would install black iron along with the ceiling framing materials at 13 feet, saving 2 feet of framing materials times the length of these details. As a company, we do tens of thousands of lineal feet of soffits and fascias a year. So it's a huge waste reduction in a year. Secondly, over the last 10 years, we've been using the panel match system, which many of you probably have seen on this conference call. Jacobson was the first company in New York City to implement this machine. We utilize prefabricated headers, finished ends and fascias created with our panel max system. This method requires much less finishing, like joint compound, corner beads. It could reduce materials by up to 70% and the waste of those materials. In addition, the scrap pieces of drywalls and cutoffs often are reused and repurposed into usable details using our panel max system. We currently have these machines at our shop facility. We also have mobile machines we send that are actually on the job site. These are also a cost savings to the GC as there's less cuts of drywall and less cleanup on the job. Where the machines are located, it's a centralized cleanup. So there's not scraps all over the job that workers have to pick up and work around. Thirdly, we also use, as much as possible, we try to use full height drywall panels to go past the ceiling molding. This is to minimize cross seams that would require more material, more finishing, and cutting and waste. This can be built in as an architectural specification at the design stage. These panels are also pre-ordered and cut to size to minimize waste. And we oftentimes have our suppliers and vendors cut these panels to the exact size we need to minimize waste. So finally, at one of our job sites, one of our taper foremen came up with this brilliant idea, which I thought is typically we use, everyone's seen the 5-gallon buckets of joint compound with the green lid. One of our taper foremen started ordering 50-gallon drums of joint compound and dispensing the compound into the taping machines that way, which I thought was a brilliant idea. Reducing waste, reducing buckets all over the job. Just to give an example, over 1 year, Jacobson used 20,000 buckets of joint compound on the job. So little ideas like this can save a tremendous amount of waste on the job. In addition, those drums are also reusable.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
I'm personally in awe of the length you go to in order to mitigate waste on job sites and how little I knew about it before we spoke,
Yeah.
as it relates to this panel. So thank you.
Thank you.
Michael, earlier you referred to standards that we as industry all utilize, not just you, but Brita and Jennifer, that we utilize for decades when designing millwork. and how wasteful the result often is. What are some other suggestions you have for us of how to, reimagine design with a single focus of optimizing our materials and reducing waste?
So I wanted to talk about the costs.
We'll talk the cost. We're talking about the cost in the next section.
Okay. So reimagining design. As I said, the Brita talked about slip matched or book matched. You don't need to really know the terminology of woodworking to understand the concept, and that is all natural materials, especially wood. People don't really realize it, but wood, our forests in the planet, that's our carbon bank, right? So the trees are what stores carbon, and burning of fuel and coal and all this stuff is what is eroding our, we hear about the ozone layer, whether you attribute that to industry or natural occurrence, it doesn't matter. Trees store carbon. And so when we use wood, I'm not talking about, composition wood, I'm talking about wood. It's a renewable material. And the more we use it, and for the long and use it for a long time, the more we're going to impact the planet, which is more than just waste, right? We all know, I know Brita has plants in her office, and I do too. And plants provide the planet an incredible service, and wood is a plant, right? It's a tree. And so as we look at design, and this is purely selfishly speaking, the more use of wood it actually helps the planet, because a lot of us don't realize it, but the LEED's effort about gold LEEDs or silver or whatever on reusing renewable materials and you get points for all this kind of stuff. North America has been replanting trees at a greater rate of use since the Lacey Act, which was, I think, 1913 or something like that. North America, specifically the U.S., is very good at improving the environment through the use of natural materials. And so if we can think about design that way, we're going to be helping ourselves not only with waste, but with using materials that are friendly for the environment. And it's the design community starts that process, right? And we'll talk about, costs and all that in another segment, but this is the exciting part, that there's a new palette to be painted, right? And
Yes.
then everyone on this call is a user of that. We're all in this industry. Every one of these, whatever, 200 names, we all have a part of it. And we all can imagine space in a different way and how we use material, to create that space that is better for the planet, not only for waste, but for, using renewable material, right?
Yes, correct.
Does that sort of answer what you asked?
Yeah, it does. It does. This is an evolving conversation. We're all here to riff off of each other and learn. So thank you, everybody. You have all responded with innovative waste management strategies that challenge the idea of business as usual, for sure, in the industry. Now to the question on everyone's mind, and actually I'm seeing a lot of questions come in relating to the cost. Is there an added cost, and how do we engage our clients into this conversation? What is the business case for doing the right thing? Let us start with Sean.
Thanks, Elvira. Yeah, we're often asked the cost question as well during our A&D presentations and our conversations with clients and our CM partners. And I like the current term cost neutrality for carpet and ceiling tile recycling, because the labor is the labor to take out the materials from the building. It has to be brought down the freight car. I mean, the freight car in these buildings is often the limiting factor of the time of the whole project. So it has to come up off the floor and onto a pallet and out of the building. We will haul carpet tiles and ceiling tiles on the same truck for efficiency. They're just not mixed together in that compaction truck. So we're constantly looking for efficiency in our process. And again, this starts with that audit at the beginning of the process to see what's there. And I would venture to say on 60% of our carpet tile recycling projects, we can beat the traditional landfill and demolition cost. And we're often also subcontractors to demolition contractors because they're really somewhat, my one partner, Carl, used to always say that the demolition teams are allergic to skids because the palletization they see is a little extra labor intensive and they have to procure the skids. So we're kind of we've redesigned that paradigm, and it's worked very well in New York City, due to the density. But if we were more expensive on a consistent basis, we wouldn't be successful. And similar thing with ceiling tiles. I mean, the same labor, ceiling tile down, carpet tile up, we're palletizing, and hopefully we're not having to repalletize and rehandle things at our Roselle warehouse headquarters, unless, of course, like we mentioned before, we do that grading of the ABC for potential for reuse as best we can. We hope to hear from more folks on the call that might be desiring a secondary life of a carpet tile. Someone asked the question, what is the lifespan? I mean, I wouldn't be willing to warranty a carpet tile for another 10 years after maybe it was on the floor. But if you see what we have, it doesn't really wear out. If the stains and cuts are thrown away or recycled at the manufacturing level, the tiles can last another 5 to 8 years, I think, no problem. And there's so many variables, right? Traffic, inflation, et cetera. But it's very durable material. And I think stuff could last 20 years under normal traffic conditions, 20 years. So it's got
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
I just want to remind the panelists, we only have a couple of more minutes left, and I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So if you could keep your answers concise. I know we all have a lot to say. Will, can you please add to what Sean was saying in terms of cost neutrality?
Yeah, so this might come off, I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way, but the fact that we're all asking at top of mind this price is why we've worked so hard to be cost neutral as well. It's just because we actually don't believe at the moment that in the current environment there really is an appetite to pay a little bit more for recycling. And part of the reason that I think that's the case is, like I said before, we don't have our own trucks. We don't actually do the hauling. So we are non-discriminate in who we work with. We'll work with any hauler in New York City for the most part. And so if you're doing a project and you say you want X number of materials to be recycled, if you're getting respondents from 3 different contracting firms, chances are all 3 of those firms use or work with Cooper Recycling already. So that recycling element is being satisfied since they already work with us. But since they're all competing with each other, at the end of the day, you're going to look at, all else being equal, what is the cost? So we've done a lot of work to try and remain cost neutral. We are cost competitive with all of our competition. It also so happens that all of the recycling facilities are consolidated. They're all in the same location. So with exception to a few hauling companies who also own and operate their own transfer stations or facilities like ours, there really should be no difference in cost across the board. Yeah, I mean, if anything, like Sean was saying before, if anything, there's a reduced cost associated with reducing the amount of labor associated with separating materials on site. We want you to put everything in mixed.
Thank you, Will. Brita and Jan, just take a couple of minutes and talk about how do we get the client engagement. Jan, you were talking about the perception of added labor, therefore cost. How do you change that perception?
Yeah, so there are some instances where double handling of material will happen. So finding efficiencies to prevent double handling will help added cost. Regarding perception, I think the more normalized this becomes within practices, the idea of a cost being added would also go away in some instances. Some instances absolutely valid, but I think the idea of like something new and different, we see a cost every so often just to kind of be a barrier and a protection of risk, really. So it's more of risk protection if there is an added cost. So the more familiar people are on site and whatnot with these practices, and our team as well learning more efficiencies, I think costs could only go down. Getting clients engaged, as to William's point, people aren't really looking to pay a premium. You know, I think pre-COVID, one thing COVID has done is put more of a focus on like health and well-being. And so sustainability has an element of health and well-being, strongly so, where waste management could perhaps be grouped into that. So if there is any added cost for separation of what materials are on site and different handling, then perhaps might see it being more beneficial and clients pursuing.
Thank you, Jen. Rita?
Yeah, I can piggyback on that. I mean, I agree 100% that the fact that it's not normalized, it's something that's sort of, it's seen as an added cost because of that. If it was something that was integrated into a project budget at the beginning, at the onset of the project, I don't know that it would be considered in that way. I think also at the end of the day, you know, you have to do something with the material, whether it's recycled or goes to the landfill. You know, you have to pay for something. And I think it comes down to priorities. There's buckets, right, of where you're spending your money on the project. And maybe in certain instances, it makes sense to shift money out of one bucket into the sustainability and waste management bucket. And I think that goes back to our values as an industry. I think the other piece of this is that the waste management process needs to be demystified a little bit. I don't know that everybody understands it. I certainly didn't until I really dug into this. And I think if clients could better understand the sort of tangible outcomes of this, you know, the notion that there's a construction waste plan at the beginning of a project, that there's parties that are engaged, that have certain responsibilities, that people are accountable, that, you know, on the job site, you're going to be getting reports within 24 hours or 48 hours of when things are hauled off site. You'll be getting monthly reports of what's being diverted. There's all this data that could come out of it that could actually be beneficial to a client. So I think the notion that you're not just recycling for fun, but you're getting something, you're getting a return on your investment, and then that can be used for, you know, attracting new talent. Millennials are like 70% of the workforce, or they will be in the next 6 years, according to Fast Company. And the majority of those folks want to work at a place that has some sort of sustainability agenda. So I think all of these things can kind of tie back to the company and help support their sort of higher level business objectives.
Yeah, thank you, Brita and Jan. And you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, it's about priorities and values. And we need to take a pause and realize that the opportunities to reuse and recycle are really readily available to us. They're all around us. We need to shift from thinking this is waste to thinking this is a raw material, and make it our mission to find ways to incorporate these raw materials into our process. And I personally challenge everyone who joined this discussion to revisit their own organizational project processes, put the well-being of people and the sustainability of the environment first. And with that, I'm going to conclude today's program and move on to the Q&A. Give me just 1 minute.
I saw a question from Connie Van Rijn, and it had to do with basically, you know, ESG and how do we measure and prove that we're actually, you know, affecting reduction of waste. And so we've talked about this before. And so I think that there are ways that we can do that. So specifically in my case, you talk about woodwork, I talked about the 3-to-1 waste on veneer. So why couldn't a specification be written that says that the woodworker must demonstrate that they've, you know, they've 2-to-1 or less in waste factor for veneer, which would challenge me to figure out how to do that which there'll be a communication back and forth to achieve that. So I think it can be written. I also have said on, we've had discussions that when leads first came out, everybody was like, oh my God, this is, how are we going to do this? And for my own case, I don't know how many years ago, 15 years ago or 10 years ago, we used to add 10% to a contract because we didn't understand it. We didn't understand the costs and we were just scared of it. And now I'd say it's probably 0.5%. So, the first step is the communication, right? We're communicating to our peers here. Then we're going to communicate to our customers, the end users. They're going to assign what the value is on that to them or not. And then we could come up with sort of standards that say, how do we measure the reduction of that waste? And I think it's not really, I always say, how do you eat an elephant? It's like one bite at a time, right? So I think this is nothing more than that. And we could do it. We could definitely do it.
Thank you, Michael. Would anyone
Welcome.
else to answer that question?
Sure. Just on ESG and transparency and data. So we work with a firm called RCI. That's the Recycling Certification Institute. And I think often recycling as an industry gets kind of bad rap because people say, oh, I put this in the recycling bin, but oh, is it really going to get recycled? And the answer to that question is not always. You're not, just because you put it in the recycling bin does not mean that it's going to get recycled. And that goes back to what we were discussing about gypsum wallboard and mixing all these things. When you mix materials and there can be contamination, not everything can be recycled. So I love to be upfront about this. We don't recycle everything. Again, 60% or 80%, depending on your definition of recycling. But what we do is we verify our numbers through the Recycling Certification Institute. We publish our numbers online every month. They're available at the Recycling Certification Institute. And we want people to ask questions. We want people to be involved in the process because the sad truth of the matter is another major challenge that we face is there are people in the industry who are willing to misrepresent what their recycling rates are. So if you're not careful and you don't really care, if you're more interested in recycling as much as possible, you can probably find someone who will tell you, oh, hey, by the way, we got 100% of it. Congratulations, it's all been recycled. I don't think that's a good thing to do. And we've tried to create this standard in the industry for everyone to say, here it is, all the numbers out on the table. Let's see what we got. We think that that's a good way to kind of raise the bar across the industry.
Excellent, William. Just to add to that, Bill, I think it's great you're part of the RCI. It's wonderful that the numbers are being verified and scrubbed. I think the line component has been reduced quite a bit the last 15 years from what it was, when LEED started, as Michael said. But just my 2 cents that was included earlier in our dry runs was in the specification of the waste management plan. At the end, it often says, recycle all the different materials where possible. And so it kind of leaves an out in the language for the contractor to say, well, it wasn't possible, either time-wise, potentially cost or logistics, all the above. So for my friends in the A&D community, just say, instead of where possible, just end it with submit recycling certification from Cooper Tank, Carpet Cycle, whomever, to the architect for review at the end of the project, whether it's LEED or not. And then that will that will up the bar. It'll up the bar.
That's absolutely right.
The language, yes. Thank you.
Like we like to say at Huntsman, show me the receipts. It's all about the receipts, right, at the end of the day. There is an interesting question on that topic, and it goes like this. What are the initial specification or general note steps nationwide that could reduce waste contamination? Can we universally suggest in demolition plants that all waste should be removed and stored separately, or does this add to the double handling and increased cost of recycling?
If I can answer that question,
Yeah,
I'd say when it comes to us, and I think in most urban areas, you're going to have recycling firms like us. You can mix everything except for 3 things: gypsum, carpet, and ceiling tiles. Gypsum, carpet, and ceiling tiles, if you can remember to separate 3 things, let it be those 3 things. You will recycle those materials, and for all of the other debris, you will allow that to be recycled as well. So those are the 3, in my opinion, that everybody should know about.
Anyone else?
And to that point as well, during demo, it's probably the easiest, so to speak, of that time for stores separating, because there's such a large volume and quantity of one material at one time. And at William's point, not everything, will necessarily be recyclable, but during the demo phase. But if you could try to single stream the other materials, you kind of guarantee a higher recycling rate if you could have a dedicated truck for that material to prevent contamination or getting mixed and separated and off and wasted somewhere else. It wouldn't necessarily be double handling at all based on how it's separated on site. We have marked bins, we do on some projects. So marking the containers kind of make it easier where it's just a designated no container bin for a certain material. Causes less confusion, makes it easier for our laborers on site, but that's one strategy during demo, which tends to be, a good focus to have in furniture liquidation, whatnot.
Thank you, Jen. This is the question for Cooper Tank and Carpet Cycle. How much waste does a project need to generate in order to be hauled into a recycling facility? What are the limitations? In other words, what size job makes the hauling feasible, and how to work around those limitations on small projects?
From our perspective, we'll take anything from anybody, anywhere, anytime. There's nothing that's too small. Nothing that's too small at all.
Will needs tons. That's a ton.
No, but seriously, I mean, everything that comes in here from any job site, whether you're do-it-yourself, working on your bathroom, or 270 Park Avenue, whatever material is coming in here, it's going to get mixed together, and we're going to try and recover everything we possibly can.
Right. We participated in 270 Park Avenue, 52 stories, over 1.2 million square feet, and to help Will out, we stripped the ceiling tiles and carpets out of 52 floors in about a 9-month period in 2019. So that was quite the project. It's down to about 10 stories of steel and concrete now. There's nothing flammable left in the building, but our box trucks hold about 12 to 15,000 square feet of carpet, to answer your question. Whereas a tractor trailer over the road going back to Georgia with that carpet tile to be recycled would hold 40,000 pounds maximum, or about 35,000 square feet. So, we consolidate small trucks to big trucks is our pretty much daily behavior. Same thing with Armstrong. We get about 35,000 pounds of ceiling tiles on the truck out to Marietta, between 8 to 10 trucks monthly.
I do want to just clarify my point. When it comes to gypsum and wallboard, that sort of thing, at the moment, we're asking that if somebody comes in, they come in with a decent amount of material. And what I mean by decent amount is probably more than 2 tons of material, so about 4,000 pounds. That said, our plan at the moment is to basically put in a 50-yard container in our yard that we can keep watertight sealed, so that we can actually start storing smaller amounts at a time. So if you came in with just one piece of gypsum from wallboard, we could, as long as it's the right gypsum, we will put it in there and accumulate it until we've reached a level that we can send it out to a recycler.
That's great, thank you. A question for Jennifer, or any other panelists who can help. Do you know of any glass office front manufacturer that is actually reusing existing glass panels or currently contributes to waste management in other ways?
Actually marked that question down to see about the manufacturers. There is one manufacturer that we've worked with in the past that took back one of their glass fronts, and I don't remember which one, so I need to get back on that. But we have seen just glass fronts being reused, kind of to Britta's point, like a lot of these projects that we are seeing, are short leases. It's relatively new material where it's in great condition, that clean it up and it could stay in place or be removed to somewhere else on the project site. So it's more of reusing it on site. There was one manufacturer that we worked with that would help refurbish and repurpose it. So I wish I knew the name of it though.
Yeah, if I could jump in there a little bit too, in the industry, we're having a lot of conversations with tenants about flexibility, as one sort of solution or evolution, and as we move beyond COVID. And I think the way that we're we desire office fronts to be flexible and we want to move them around in a space. And there's a lot of manufacturers that are doing that and working on that and trying to deal with the acoustic challenges, et cetera. There's no reason that if you can move it around in your space, that you couldn't take it with you when you move it to your next space. And that's kind of going back to this idea of reuse and, you know, planning now for what we're going to do with this stuff at the end of its life cycle or at the end of the lease in the future. You know, I find it really interesting.
Jennifer, looks like you want to say something.
Yeah, kind of what Rita just mentioned as well is one thing that we're going to try to start doing, which I think might be a little bit further down the line, but suggestion for those interested on the chat with questions about the circular economy, closing the loop. It's challenging to do, especially when it comes to construction waste. So one aspect that could be worth considering is creating a document at the end of a project where you give it to the client or the building owner so they know what materials are on site. So you have like a record of what's on site so they know the materials and whatnot. You can either help take back programs or helping with the lifespan of these materials that can be reused for different projects. So I think just that transparency of information of knowing what the designers are working with. So having that booklet of materials recorded of what is on a site when it's turned over for demo.
I've seen this happening in Europe, actually. They've been calling it material passports.
Exactly.
Which appropriate, but I think it's a great idea.
I like the passport. Do we have time for one more question? Chris? All right, I'm just going to go for it.
Yeah, go for it, absolutely.
This is for Sean with Carpet Cycle. Let's see. Are there specific carpet tile products or specific tile product compositions that lend themselves better to manufacturer take back and remanufacturing? That's actually a really great question.
Yes, I think that was asked by Amanda, and I answered in the chat that I believe both PVC and a TPO-backed carpet tiles both lend themselves to good circularity, and that the manufacturers will take them back as long as they're consolidated efficiently and without contamination, we'll take them back for recycling. So PVC sometimes gets a bad rap, but that's by far the highest carpet we've recycled in the past 20 years with a few of the key manufacturers, Interface, Tanis, et cetera. But TPO is thermoplastic oil finish, non-PVC, but a different type of plastic that is that backing system that lays on the floor, and it's able to be recycled back into itself. So those are good stories within the carpet tile realm.
And I promise one last question, that's for Brian. What does recycled sheetrock get recycled into? I don't hear about contractors purchasing recycled material.
I believe USG has a program of recycling new drywall scraps into new panels, drywall panels.
Okay. Well, thank you, Brian. And we are actually at the top of our hour. I want to thank everyone for attending. This was an amazing panel. Please remember, part 2 and 3 are coming up. Part 2 is going to be coming out sometime end of March, and part 3 will be following close after. Do any of the panelists have any parting words before we close out?
Just thank you for joining us. I hope that you all are inspired and on board to make some moves, move the needle a bit.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Collaboration.
Yeah, thank you guys for having us. And like Rita said about thinking about these things in the beginning, thinking about the end at the beginning, I think we're doing that. So thank you again for everybody for putting this together. This has been great.
Yeah, let's do more. I think that's the objective, right? Let's do more together.
Thanks for joining the conversation.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.